So we can just go ahead to the next slide. Well, that's a really pretty graphic on them. But if you want to go ahead to where it says the Greek, the next slide. Yeah, there you go. Perfect. And we'll say a prayer in just a moment. But how this came about was that in this process of strategic planning, you know, we had this idea that last May I would come out from Charlotte because I had something to do at CDSP, and so I would come for the weekend, and by Friday night to Sunday, we'd have a plan for Grace St. Helena. There were going to be beautiful charts with writing all over them and colored dots that, you know, had our preferences and so on, and that would be the plan. But, you know, obviously with COVID, we all figured out planning just one day to the next was a huge challenge. So as the conversations continued with the we started doing the examine together and really listening to God and to ourselves each day, we were really entering some processes or a process of discernment as we did the examine exercise together. And so by July, we started calling this a strategic discernment process instead of strategic planning. And that actually, what we really needed to do was to learn how to listen to God and to each other and to ourselves as we were living in very uncertain and fragile times. And I think everybody's feeling pretty good about that. We're a very product-driven culture. So we expect goals and we really value those most, to have objectives, and you set them and you have that tangible thing to measure. So this can feel wobbly, it can feel uncertain in part because we don't know how to do it very well in our culture, but also because we're not used to thinking that way or valuing the process. So I hope that it's been good for everybody. I know for me, it's been actually a great time of learning about, you know, let's really get down to teaching how do we listen to our inner life and our spirit. So Amy said, oh, just could you do the forum on discernment? I thought, okay, sure, because that's what you do. You just say yes. And but I've done a little teaching on it before, and so I put together this little process for us today. So just to begin, this word discernment, we see it in our English, Germanic, Latin background around the 14th, 15th century. It has its roots in this Greek diagnoskein, and which is not pronounced correctly, of course, but this definition is great, to learn apart, which I think is very interesting because we're often learning to put things together. You know, we're wanting to learn to have them make sense. And I appreciate too this sense of separating sifting and sieving. That's really a great word, to sieve something, and so to even just be able to separate them, not to throw something out or to make it disappear necessarily, like if you're putting flour through a sieve, you know, you're trying to make it all the grains one size. But if you're sieving pebbles, for example, being able to see them because their sizes are different and actually value each one is a helpful thought about what this idea of discernment is. So we come at this word to distinguish between, perceive the difference, and then ultimately to judge well, since discernment does lead us to decisions. So I'd like us to go to the next slide and pray together this prayer that's attributed to St. Francis, and I'm going to invite us to keep our microphones on so that we can all hear each other, and it's going to sound really awful and awkward, and that's how life feels often. It feels like that right now, so I think it's good to just pray together in that uneven space, if you will. So let us say together, Lord,
Make us instruments of your peace. Where is hatred, let us sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is discord, union. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. Grant that we may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, it is in dying that we are born to eternal life.
It is dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen.
Thank you. So I'd like us to begin just first by thinking about our own experience of discernment. So we've all had to make, substantial decisions in our lives, right? Where we've had to really spend some time thinking about things, maybe reviewing resources, figuring out how are we going to make something happen. Even right now, as some of you have had to discern whether do you stay in your home if it's threatened by fire, or do you go, these are often quite big decisions. So, and this is the point where I think we need to ask if people would like to go into groups of 3 or so, we could do that, and you could actually talk about this if you wanted to share your experiences, or if you'd rather just take a few moments and journal something down, write something down, or ponder, just thinking about your best experience of decision making or discernment. And then there's some questions there that might help you to think about that. So would you like to be in groups, or would you like to do this just quietly on your own for a few minutes? And I can't see you, so I wonder if I can go back to the big group. There we go.
Just speak up. I've muted us all, so you got to unmute yourself if you want to opine.
I like to, I'll say I just like to reflect on my own rather than shoot from the hip here.
Okay.
Agree.
I think I'd prefer that too.
Okay, so let's, and then let's do that. And then if you want to talk about it with other people at another time, that's of course always an option. So, so we'll put the screen back up, and let's just take probably about 5 or so minutes. And here are the questions. Here are some questions. You don't have to answer them all, but they might help you think about it. So, what's uplifting about the experience that you had? What did you learn about yourself? What did you learn about others? What did you discover really mattered to you in life? Who helped you make the decision a reality? How did the outcome reflect God's will for your life? And then just take a moment to be grateful to God for the presence of the Holy Spirit during that time. So we can just go and do a little journaling for a few minutes, just about 5 minutes.
Mary?
Yes.
If there are 2 other people that prefer to talk about it, I would like that. If not, I understand.
Can somebody do a small group?
I can. This is Sarah Rowan. I'd be happy to.
Okay, great. Would you like, so other people could do it, and if somebody can put those folks in a group, then they can go do that.
I could do that in group too. This is Jennifer.
Sarah,
Okay.
Jennifer, and Judith.
Yes.
Anyone else?
Okay,
Okay, I think I can do that.
great. And then the group will come back in 5 minutes.
Anne is magical. She's the Zoom queen.
I do seem to have to stop this share, unfortunately, but I'll put it back up. So everyone will have to probably, well, you can just ignore it or accept the breakout rooms.
That time. I guess we're gone.
Yes,
You're
hi.
back. All right.
I was thinking that it was sad not to have the questions in front of us.
Oh, we couldn't get that on the screen. You might take a picture the next time, or just take a screenshot of your computer screen.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Good. Okay. So if we go to the next slide, we'll do some large group sharing towards the end, but if we go to the next slide, what I want to do is, so just to kind of holding your good experience of discernment or decision making and kind of becoming aware of what worked for you is great to bring in things you already know and that are tested and true in your own life as we think about Cynthia Bourgeault's idea of the four voices. And it's extremely practical, which is something I really like about this particular process. And I've used it in other group settings. I, in fact, advised the diocese in El Camino Real as they were thinking about discerning about their next bishop. How do you decide who to vote for? Because we had a number of great candidates, so they were all great candidates. So her idea is that you basically have two questions. I add a third one, which I'll show you. And the idea is to get the voices within to talk to each other. So she talks about four voices, and we'll go to a screen, the next screen in just a moment, but to get those communicating together instead of competing against each other. So you're not trying to get some aspect of yourself to win against some other aspect, but rather to help them to have a conversation. So her two questions are, how do I feel about the situation? And what do I do next? Right? These are very practical questions. So let's go to the next slide. And I've put this in a circle here. I don't really like the arrows because they have one direction, but I have no idea how to get them off and still have a good image that's a circle and has some sense of parts in it as well. But she talks about the four parts of the self: the ego, the soul, the heart, and the spirit. And that we want to get all of those parts of ourselves in conversation together. So her own, I mean, the ego, it's just fairly obvious, is our own sense of security, sense of safety. So right now, of course, a lot of us are feeling, you know, I mean, you are in California in particular, a very acute sense of one's own security and one's own safety and existence. There'll be some existential crises going on in the midst of that, but there's really an emergency around one's own egoic needs. The next one is of the soul, which is really our sort of our sense of identity and how we know ourselves through emotion and reason and memory and our will. I have found it personally when I think about my Myers-Briggs or my Enneagram number, you know, to those parts of me that I can't, as much as I might like to change them, that they're not going anywhere, you know. They just are who I am and how I process life. So they're kind of that meta narrative of life. There are core yearnings or inclinations that are just part of what make up our lives. Next is the heart, and that's just the sense that it's your sort of stable identity. It's that sense of the aha moments that we get, like, I know, okay, that's it right there, where you just walk in and you know what's going on. And that's that part of intuitive part of ourselves. Or for me, the word gut is an important word. And I resonate with that sense of, I just knew, it's something in my gut more than in my heart. But that's just a matter of my personality and my soul. The other is the spirit. So what is that voice of our highest spiritual reality in our life? It's where God's spirit and our spirit are connecting and working together. So our highest ideals, our highest values, our sense of not only our personal calling, but what the world is called to as an identity. So those are the pieces that she says, get those talking to each other and see what the outcome is. So let's go to the next slide. And she recommends making a grid. So I've got a little grid here. This is what you might want to take a picture of. And I have added a question because I think for me it was an important question because I thought if that question remains unconscious for me, I may try to sabotage what I am discerning that I'm meant to be doing. So the two questions Cynthia has for us is, how do I feel about the situation? What should I do next? And then I've added this third one, is what will be required of me in the future? Because sometimes we can discern something, but then we feel afraid of it, or we can't imagine that it's possible. And I find it helpful when I can identify this is what it's going to take. And so the sense of who can help me, you know, because maybe I can't do it by myself. So I'd like to take a few minutes now, and you can go back in the group for the group folks or do this alone, but to just spend some time, if you have a situation in your life right now that you're trying to discern, and you could do something really simple like, what am I having for dinner tonight, right? So if you want to practice with something sort of lightweight, that's actually good because it still gives you practice on really thinking about the words there. So if we take another 5 minutes and just go through and fill in that grid, I think we can do that. Does everybody understand the definitions from the previous slide of the ego, soul, spirit, and heart? Does that feel pretty comprehensible? Mm-hmm. I can't see you right now, so I can only see the screen share.
Mary, would you maybe say a word about what is it like when you're listening to each of those 4 parts of yourself? Maybe that's
sure.
later, but it might help as we do the exercise.
Yeah, I think, well, I think it's important as you just listen to yourself rather than trying to pinpoint the exact self, but like when you're thinking about the matter you want to discern right now, then you might listen to what you're saying and hear where that fits. So when I'm concerned about my survival, my ego is going to be pretty anxious probably, right? So if I'm thinking about what am I going to have for dinner tonight, and my ego is saying, well, what am I most concerned about in the moment? And am I most concerned about not wanting to gain any weight? Or am I most concerned about having some kind of sensor in my brain feel better? So ice cream sounds really good, you see, right? But those are competing, right? Ice cream is not going to help me keep weight off, but it's sure going to make my brain feel good during this time of COVID when I'm stuck at home alone, right? We all know about the COVID-10. Now, if I'm thinking about my, my spirit, my highest spiritual reality is ice cream doesn't really matter. You need something nutritious to live well day to day, right? So that's a bigger calling. And then in terms of the soul, I could certainly spend plenty of time rationalizing why I should and should not have the ice cream. The soul one's probably not going to help me too much in this one because, you know, there's lots of things I can say where ice cream is a very rational, good idea. I'm sure Aquinas would have some ice cream right now, thinking about how it was good for the emotions and the memory and the will. And then the heart, you know, the sense of I just knew it was right or it was just wrong. At any moment, how it hits you, you could get a different answer for that. Does that help at all? It's kind of nebulous. You sort of have to feel your way to it. And don't get too attached to the words, but actually just be conscious of your own voice internally and from where is it speaking. So they don't also need to be equal. So don't worry if they're not equal. Like it makes sense when sometimes your ego is saving your life, right? Like when you're running from a fire, it's saving your life. And that's a good thing. Does that help?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Other questions about that? Okay, well, let's just take about 5 minutes and see what happens.